Alright, today's lesson is on solving radical equations. This is our second lesson. If you have not already printed out the video guide that goes along with this lesson, please pause the video, print it out, and come back. So we are solving radical equations. We're going to review really quick what a new radical equation is. A radical equation, remember, just it must have a square root. That's all there is to it. The word radical represents our square root. So we have to have a square root in our equations today. Now, before we get into our problems today, let's review how we cancel a square root. Last time we talked about how the opposite of a square root was to square both sides, or raise each side to the second power. So all we need to do is raise both sides to the second power. That cancels out the square root and the exponent. We're left with x, but you must also square the right-hand side as well. So 3 squared is 9. So x equals 9 would be our solution. Let's take a look at number 1. For number 1, we have the square root of k minus 7 equals 4. We need to solve this equation for k. Now what's different about these problems from what we did in our last video lesson is that the square root stops after the k. The 7 is not underneath the square root. So now we have to work this a little bit differently from what we did before. If you ever have a number outside of the square root, you have to cancel out that number first before you cancel out the square root. So that means I need to cancel out this minus 7 before I can get rid of the square root that's over the k. So to cancel out a minus 7, the opposite would be to add 7. So I'm going to add 7 on both sides. My 7's cancel. I get the square root of k equals 4 plus 7 is 11. Now that the number is gone, all I have left is the square root, so now I can square both sides. So I raise both sides to the second power. My square root and my square cancel. I get k equals 11 times 11 is 121. And that's my answer. So make sure you know where the number is located. If it's under the square root, okay, we have to cancel the square root first, and then we can get rid of the number. If it's outside of the square root, we must cancel the number first and then get rid of the square root. Let's take a look at number 2. We have 3 and then the square root of x plus 2 equals 18. So we need to cancel out any number that's outside of the square root first. Now the 3 is outside of the square root, so I need to cancel it first. This 3 is actually being multiplied to the square root. If they're right next to each other, it means multiplication. Okay, just like when a number is right next to a letter. So if this is multiplied, the opposite would be to divide. So I need to divide both sides by 3. My 3's will cancel. I get the square root of x plus 2 equals 18 divided by 3 is 6. Now this 2 is underneath the square root. So if it's underneath the square root, I must get rid of the square root first, and then I can cancel out the 2. So the opposite of a square root is to square it or raise it to the second power. So I must do that on both sides. That cancels out the square root and the exponent. I'm left with x plus 2. Whatever's underneath just stays the same. And then 6 to the second power, 6 times 6, which is 36. Now I can get rid of the 2. Now that the square root's gone, we can cancel the 2. This is a plus 2, so the opposite of adding 2 is to subtract 2 on both sides. They cancel. I get x equals 34. And that's my answer. Let's look at number 3. For number 3, we have 6 equals the square root of 3p minus 3. Again, pay attention to where the numbers are located. Okay? This 3 is underneath the square root. The minus 3 is not. The square root ends here. That makes a big difference. So we need to cancel out the minus 3 first before I can cancel out the square root. So the opposite of subtracting 3 is to add 3 on both sides. So 6 plus 3 is 9 equals the square root of 3p. Now, my 3 and the p are both underneath the square root. So that means I need to square root or cancel the square root next. The opposite of the square root is to square both sides. 9 squared is just 9 times 9, which is 81, equals 3p. All that happens is that the square root and the square cancel. The 3p stays the same. And now my last step is to cancel out this 3. This is 3 times p, so the opposite is divide. So when we divide both sides by 3, 81 divided by 3 is 27. My 3's cancel, and I'm left with p. So 27 equals p is my answer. Number 4. We have the square root of f over 4 plus 7 equals 10. Again, any number that's outside of the square root must get canceled first. So the 7 is on the outside, so I need to cancel it first. This is a plus 7, so to cancel it, I will subtract 7 on both sides. Cancel. I get the square root of f over 4 equals 10 minus 7 is 3. The f and the 4 are both under the square root, so to cancel it, I will square both sides. The square root and the square cancel. The f over 4 does not change. And 3 squared is just 3 times 3, which is 9. My last step is to cancel out the 4. This means f divided by 4. Anytime it's written as a fraction, it means division. So the opposite of dividing by 4 is to multiply both sides by 4. My 4's cancel. I get f equals 36 as my solution. Number 5. Our problem is 3 and then the square root of 7g plus 1 equals 24. There's a little bit more to this one. Again, pay attention to where the numbers are located. The 3 is outside of the square root, so I need to cancel it first. This 3 is being multiplied by the square root. Make sure you pay attention. It's right next to the square root, which means multiplication. So the opposite will be to divide. I need to divide both sides by 3. So my 3's cancel. I get the square root of 7g plus 1 equals 8. Now, I need to cancel out the square root. The 7 and the 1 are both under the square root, so the square root needs to be canceled. The opposite of the square root is to square both sides. So my square root cancels out. I have 7g plus 1 equals 8 to the second power is just 64. Now I need to get rid of the 1. Remember, whatever's being added or subtracted gets canceled before what's being multiplied once the square root is gone. So the plus 1 needs to be canceled, which means we will subtract 1 on both sides. My 1's cancel out. I get 7g equals 63. And my last step is to cancel out the 7. It's being multiplied, so the opposite would be to divide. I'm going to divide both sides by 7. I get g equals 9. Okay, last problem, number 6. We have 2 equals the square root of r over 5 minus 1 minus 4. Again, pay attention to where the square root ends. It ends after the 1, which means the 4 is outside of the square root. So we need to cancel out the minus 4 first. So the opposite of subtracting 4 is to add 4 on both sides. 2 plus 4 is 6 equals the square root of r over 5 minus 1. Now the 5 and the 1 are both under the square root, which means the square root now needs to be canceled. The opposite of a square root is to square both sides. So 6 squared is just 6 times 6, which is 36. The square root and the square cancel, and I'm left with r over 5 minus 1. To cancel out the minus 1, I need to add 1 to both sides. 36 plus 1 is 37. R over 5 stays the same, and my 1's cancel out. And we have one last step. Remember, a fraction means division. This is r divided by 5. So the opposite of dividing is multiplying. So I need to multiply both sides by 5. Now this is going to be a little bit of a larger number, so let's go ahead and multiply it over here. 37 times 5. 5 times 7 is 35, carry the 3. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 3 is 18. So my answer is 185 equals, the 5's cancel, and I have r. So 185 is our answer. At this point, go ahead and pause the video, try the next 2 problems, and then come back to the video and I'll have the answers for you. Okay, so the answer for problem A, remember you need to get rid of the number that's outside of the radical first, and then square both sides, and then you can add the 7. You should get that w equals 16 for your answer. If not, pause, take a look at my work, and check your work with mine. For the second problem, problem B, again, get rid of the number outside of the square root, then square both sides, and then cancel out the 9 and the 2. You should get that 8 equals y. If you did not, again, check your work with mine. And this finishes our lesson on solving radical equations.